Hey guys, what's happening? So with us getting back into our coverage of Venom War, for this one we'll be talking about what is effectively the return of the Symbiotes. But for a portion of this we'll also be covering Symbiote Black Widow's origin, as well as her journey into Venom War, since it's closely tied into the way this story develops. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so in our recent coverage of Venom Volume 5, we saw Natasha Romanoff following a lead on a covert syndicate that went by the title of No Name, who were kidnapping and murdering Alchemax employees. And like we saw, this investigation eventually led to her arriving at a site where Venom and Thompson barely made it out, and it was here where she initially found a curious newborn symbiote, to which she bonded to, and shortly after they took on the identity of Widow. They teamed up with Dylan, helped him to save Thompson and go after No Name. But it was at this time where we found out that Dylan did not believe Widow was a good host for a newborn symbiote. And it's not even like Dylan knew about Natasha's sketchy interrogation methods, where she would use the symbiote to extract information from people, while also allowing it to feed on their brains. And it wasn't even so much the case of Dylan thinking Natasha wasn't a good person, but it was more so the case of him believing that a spy was a bad choice for the first host for this newborn symbiote. But it wasn't something that was lingered on for too long, with Venom telling Dylan that they need Widow, regardless of Natasha being the best fit for this symbiote or not. So at the time they just went with it because Bren and Thompson's lives were on the line. But one of the substantial things about No Name was that they were trying to get revenge, because years ago Alchemax leaked a mysterious substance called K-43 into the water supply that killed a number of people, only for Alchemax to cover it up. And we'll get into more about Natasha looking into this K chemical in a little bit. But if you want to check out more about this story, I got a link in the description that'll get you all caught up. But after her team up with Dylan, the Sleeper, Symbiote, and Thompson, Natasha and her symbiote went their own way, whilst Dylan's story went into Symbiosis Necrosis, as well as Carnage Volume 4, which were both leading us into the start of Venom War. And following this, in the Black Widow Hawkeye series, in a sequence of events where at first Widow thought Clint was dead, she used her symbiote to get the information to find him. And she eventually did find him in Madripoor, where he was definitely alive and wanted for the murder of the Russian minister. And so I don't want to spend too much time on this particular story, but there are a couple of things from it that I feel like I need to bring up because of the way they come back in both Black Widow Venomous and Venom War Venomous. So bear with me for a moment here. But not long after Clint confessed to killing the Russian minister, Natasha and her symbiote knew Clint was lying. So her symbiote took it upon itself to try and go into Clint's mind and get the answers, which, as we've seen prior to this point, it's not a pretty process, because the symbiote practically tends to lobotomize whoever it does this to. So Natasha stopped it from pulling the truth out of Clint. But only seconds later, when Clint was hit with a lethal poison dart coming from an assassin sent by Natasha's old enemy Damon Dran, this then led to Natasha using her symbiote to extract the deadly poison from Clint to save his life. And there was more elements that were at play in this series, with Clint not being too crazy about the symbiote, as well as the symbiote being a bit jealous about how close Natasha and Clint are, with it asking Natasha to see her memories with Clint and things of that nature. This all built up to what we would find out later in Black Widow Venomous Issue 1, when at the time Natasha and her symbiote went to infiltrate a secret Alchemax lab. But when they got there, Natasha's symbiote extracted information from the guard. This spooked her symbiote big time, so it left Natasha by herself at this high security secret facility. And I mean, fortunately, this is Natasha Romanoff we're talking about here. She can hold her own against a group of armed men, but when it comes down to cybernetic symbiote tech mini bosses, let's just say she did not advance to the next level. And it was for this reason, with Natasha being by herself, she was not able to finish the mission. So following this, when Natasha went back to the safe house, she had a few choice words for the symbiote. And it wasn't so much the case of her going off or anything like that, but instead she just made it clear to her symbiote that it left her hanging. But once they get into the reason why it bailed on Natasha, she finds out when her symbiote looked into the guard's mind, it saw a scientist using a version of the K chemical to kill another symbiote by burning it from the inside out, which confirmed to Natasha that this Alchemax lab had a version of K-43 there. But before they're even going to consider going back, Natasha knew that her symbiote needed to be as reliable as her in the field, and to do so it was going to need training. And instead of just having the symbiote access Natasha's memories and learn from them, Natasha was like, no, she needed to actually train it, so the symbiote could respond like its muscle memory or second nature. So to carry out this training, Natasha provided a version of the Red Room in her mind to give her symbiote the rigorous training she had at a young age. And you can kind of see where Natasha's coming from with this logic, since the symbiote is very young as well. Though at the same time, the problem with Red Room training is that it broke more people than it graduated. And even for the candidates that made it through, every development wasn't necessarily all for the better. And it isn't too long before Natasha notices this, when she sees her symbiote struggling, which immediately reminds her of herself. And in a way, it kind of goes back to what Natasha said at the beginning of this series. Because when it started, she said, "It's funny. When I look back on my life, how I got here, I sometimes forget all I had to endure." And when you jump forward to now, she's like, "It's funny. I forgot that training didn't have to be like this. I can do better. I will do better." So for that reason, Widow decided to take a different approach, because she also had friends who helped her over the years. So as a quick rundown, from here the symbiote learned from Jessica Drew how to be flexible, it learned confidence and precision from Hawkeye, it trained with Bucky Barnes, who also taught it not to be overconfident, Nick Fury brought in the espionage tips, and Agent Phil Coulson showed it how to be unassuming and blend in. And for the final test, Natasha taught it how to deal with distractions in the midst of chaos, which from there completed the symbiote's training. So from there, Natasha told it to take some time to think about a name, since together they're Widow, but by itself, the symbiote hasn't had its own name, at least not until now, with her symbiote deciding to go with the name Sliver. So after they bond again, with Sliver having gone through its training, they return to the Alchemax facility, so Widow can have a proper fight with the Symbiote Tech mini-boss, who they end up taking down rather quickly. But also as a result of Slither's training, Widow's given an upgraded look now that Slither has more experience, so that's also going to be something new for the two of them going forward. But this time around, they make it all the way through this Alchemax facility, and they're able to get their hands on the K chemical, which now makes their mission a success. Now they just gotta get it in the hands of someone they trust. So next, this takes us into Venom War Venomous issue 1, which starts off with the two of them attending a black market auction. And it's here where they come across Dr. Freck, who's introducing K42T as a quote-unquote silver bullet to the symbiote mess. And so prior to this, we talked about some of the different versions of the K chemical. And for the most part throughout the Venom series and the Carnage series, we've been dealing with K43, which was distributed in a number of different ways. Whether it was the Alchemax accident that leaked it into the water supply, making a ton of people sick and killing many others, or what we saw Liz Allen discover when she found out about her company having a K program experimenting on symbiotes right under her nose. But even with K43 being the most mentioned up to this point, there's a number of other applications of the K chemical that just haven't been named. But as of Venom War issue 1, we found out through Meridius that K44 is the most advanced version out there. So with that said, just think of K42 as an earlier offshoot of what they've developed along the way, because we'll see where this is heading in just a little bit. But in the here and now, this is being advertised as a weapon to neutralize symbiotes. So they bring in this guy who they're about to bond with this random symbiote material, and I highly doubt this dude volunteered for this. Like, they probably just grabbed him off the street and was like, "Hey man, we're gonna give you a fresh haircut on TikTok." And the next thing you know, he wakes up with a needle in his arm. But they end up doing this. They inject this symbiote material into him. But when they do, he just turns into this mindless symbiote monstrosity that looks like it just crawled out of the upside down. So immediately, Natasha and her symbiote, they leap into action, because it's rather clear that this thing's getting ready to kill everybody in the room. So first they end up grabbing Dr. Freck and webbing him to the wall because they need him alive. And for a moment here, Natasha tries to get Slither to communicate with this thing, but Slither just lets her know that that's not possible, because it's not even sentient. So for a moment, Natasha starts to go back to Dr. Freck so he could tell her what they should do next, but Slither tells her no, because he's just going to want them to kill it. But before they can even get to him to hear him out, this thing grabs Widow, and it's right here where her symbiote, Slither, tells her that it has an idea. So it ends up removing itself from Natasha to place itself on this mindless symbiote, allowing the two of them to split up just for a brief moment, so Natasha can go and grab the K42T chemical from Dr. Freck, rebond with Sliver, and use the chemical to stop this mindless symbiote monstrosity. And it ends up working because it breaks this thing down while still managing to keep this guy alive. And it's one of those things that kind of has me thinking about what Liz Allen mentioned in the Carnage series when she spoke about versions of the K chemical that would make people immune to symbiotes. So it's possible we might be seeing some of that here, though we're not told in the moment. And after confirming this guy's still alive, Widow then makes her way back to Dr. Freck, demanding that he gives her the rest of his K42T. but he just tells her he only made enough for the auction. So he ends up giving her a book with the formula, so Widow destroys it, and she tells Slither to remove it from his mind as well, and only leave him with the guilt. And when they leave, there's even a moment here where Natasha asks Sliver, how much of his memory did you leave him with? And Sliver's just like, he'll live, but not well, which is really messed up. But at the same time, he might find a bright side to it, because now he can go back and play all his favorite games for the first time. And just after this, the two of them make their way to Alchemax, and as they move in closer, Slither tells Natasha that it senses another symbiote, which is a really interesting choice of words, because as it turns out, it's Flash Thompson. So for a moment, Flash and Natasha are like, well, what are you doing here? No, what are you doing here? They do that whole routine. So they start to catch up, with Flash telling Natasha about Carnage coming back, Flash is introduced to Slither, so on and so forth. But at the same time, with Slither just saying that there's a symbiote nearby, and I could be looking too deep into this, but in a way it just reminds me of what Carnage said recently about him and Flash being very similar. As far as the whole idea with Cletus Cassidy dying and coming back with his consciousness in the Carnage symbiote, and it's like King in Black gave Flash a similar return as well. But like Carnage said, since Flash has been back, he doesn't truly understand what he is. Not completely. So here's hoping that we get the fullness of that answer sometime soon. But while they're in the middle of getting each other caught up, an alarm goes off at Alchemax, so they make their way down to the sublevels. But as they do, Flash warns Widow that they better be careful, because it's down here where they keep the real nasty stuff. So again, Natasha tries to get Slither to talk to these symbiotes, only for Sliver to tell her that it can't, because they're all just like the one at the auction. They're all mindless, and there's a ton of them. So to handle this, Flash is like, okay, that's a cold storage. If we can lure them there, maybe we can slow them down. So next, they try to save what scientists they can here by telling them to head for the exit behind them, while Widow and Flash fight their way closer to the cadaver storage in hopes of leading the zombiotes closer so the cold temperatures can slow them down. But as soon as they open this thing up, Widow gets knocked back, and out from this storage comes a whole horde of even more zombiotes. And these things are a lot like what we saw with Lee Price, just before he was absorbed by Meridius. But this time around, it's more like a zombiote outbreak. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.